Hey, Dog Nation, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're going to have Mike Griffith on today's show. It's kind of funny. There's this huge thing that's been going on in Indianapolis, the scouting combine. A lot of Georgia players involved with that, trying to make a name for themselves, move on to the next level. We probably haven't done as much combine stuff this week as we otherwise would have had it not been for the Scott Cochran news that broke. So from Indianapolis, we'll hear from Mike on that today. And we'll do a little bit more of that stuff with him as a part of today's program. I'm going to start the show in a minute by having some fun with the Florida Gators at their expense. Who doesn't like that on a Thursday? Let me bring Eddie a little closer, by the way, too. Make sure we get him in full view of the screen today. I'm also going to – I have a very stupid idea that at least it's going to come across that way to begin with. However, I'm going to try to make my case why it's maybe not quite so dumb as it initially seems. We'll do that later on. I got a bone to pick with the professional football franchise here in our home state. I'll do a lot of stuff on today's show, including very, very interesting stuff from a former UGA player about how this upcoming season's Bulldogs might perform. We'll tell you all about that as well. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, before we're done today, I have what is probably a little bit of a dumb idea. At least it seems that way on paper right at first blush. It's something I think the SEC could do that I think UGA fans would actually enjoy. I'll tell you more about that coming up today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll also check in with our buddy Mike Griffith from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. We'll find out what has been going on with the former UGA guys there, getting ready to make their name in the NFL world. We'll do all of that coming up in a moment. Let me begin this way. I briefly mentioned this, I think, at some point in time this week. I'm sure you probably read about this at DawgNation.com. As predicted, Tim Brewster, who's kind of bluster for hire, he's been a little bit of a hype man wherever he's worked. He was head coach at Minnesota, total failure in that job. A little more successful as an assistant coach working with Jimbo Fisher, most recently as an assistant coach at UNC. He's one of these guys brought to Florida now as tight ends coach, whose job really is to provide the Gators what they have not really had. Dan Mullen is just not a black belt recruiter. He is just not one of these guys that kind of tapes up his knuckles and goes to, hand-to-hand combat in the world of recruiting the SEC and does very well. Not only does he not recruit the SEC footprint particularly well, he doesn't even recruit his own state all that well. That's just not really been his MO. He's one of these guys that's made a name for himself. You see this a lot of times when it comes to like Academy Award season. If you like movies, things like that, there are critically acclaimed movies, not necessarily a movie that made a lot of money at the box office, not necessarily a movie that a lot of people really enjoyed, but man, writers, they loved it. Guys and gals who do reviews for a living, guys and gals who spend their entire life on Twitter kind of, talking over everybody else's head. Boy, they love these movies. They're critically acclaimed movies. You see a lot of that Academy Award season time. That's really kind of what Dan Mullen is as a coach. He's a critically acclaimed coach. The sports writer who wants to show you how smart he is or how smart she is will say, listen, Dan Mullen, when it comes to coaching him up, boy, he really did that. For my money, he was the best coach in the SEC West when he was coaching at Mississippi State because he found a way to do more with less. That was always kind of Mullen's reputation. But at Florida, as many of you know, and this is actually a compliment even though I'm a Gator hater, at Florida, the goal, the objective isn't to do more with less. The goal is to do more with more. Match the resources of your chief competition, find a way to win game. So now Dan Mullen's going to kind of reinvent himself a little bit. He's gotten all these pats in the backs all these years for kind of coaching up 3 stars and finding a way to win 7 games with a bunch of, guys that, were not getting the highest level of SEC offer. But at Florida, that's not what the job is. The job is doing more than that. So it's taken him a couple years, I think, to kind of maybe come to grips with that. And here in the 2021 cycle, it sounds like Florida is finally ready. They're not going to be pushed around anymore when it comes to recruiting, and loudmouth Tim Brewster is maybe the guy that's going to kind of help usher that new era in. He was on a 24/7 sports podcast. It's a pretty volatile quote. I mean, honestly, I'm not mad about it. I just think it's funny and fun and I guess somewhat interesting, and it sets us up for where we want to go today. Tim Brewster telling 24/7 Sports, Georgia is Georgia. And you could have just stopped at that, and that would have been probably enough. But he goes on to say, Kirby's done a good job. But what we've got to do is we've got to put stakes in the ground. That fence has got to go up. So he becomes the latest of a line of 9 million coaches to say, we're going to build a fence around our state at the Florida-Georgia border. Listen, there are a lot of Georgians, not even college football fans, would love to have a fence around the state of Florida if it kept some Floridians out. But nonetheless, he goes on to say, Kirby's got to understand that the state of Georgia is the state of Georgia, okay? We recruit the state of Georgia. We're going to get some really good players from Georgia. But we need to make sure that he understands we're going to fight him tooth and nail for the greatest resource in the state of Florida. That's the high school kids here. And just make sure that he understands and sends them that message on a daily basis that we're going to protect our own. That is Florida tight ends coach Tim Brewster via a podcast on 24/7 Sports, and I'll put a link to it when we post the show later on at the world-famous DawgNation.com. I cannot stress this enough. I am not mad at Tim Brewster for this. And this is... to kind of borrow, a line that's been used before, this is what you're supposed to do. Like, you're supposed to try to keep your own kids in state, and you're supposed to try to recruit. The fact that a guy like Brewster has to kind of come in, with a megaphone shouting all of this, the fact that it took Florida this long to do that is, I think that's pretty funny, kind of all the way around there. But nonetheless, that's just kind of what Florida is doing right now. They're sort of getting Tim Brewster involved in all this, and he's going to set a new tone for the program when it comes to recruiting, and this is kind of what you expect kind of moving forward here. This is what we're going to kind of do, which is all fine and well. Here's my advice. Just be careful what you wish for when it comes to picking a fight with Kirby Smart in recruiting. And I don't just mean across the country, and I don't just mean in Georgia's home state right here in the state of Georgia. I mean in the state of Florida as well. Be careful what you wish for, that you don't set up Kirby Smart to want to challenge you more in your own home state, whether it be taking a guy like Jalen Carter from this past cycle, taking a guy like Warren Brinson from this past cycle, who, by the way, you may remember this. Brinson was a UGA commit, decommitted from Georgia, announced a top two of Georgia and Florida, and then committed to Georgia again, essentially spiking the football on Florida in this past cycle. Be careful what you wish for when it comes to all of that. And maybe the grandest example of this of all, do you remember when Carson Beck, the 2020 quarterback signing for the Georgia Bulldogs, first announced his pledge to UGA? He's from that Jacksonville area. He goes on a Jacksonville TV station there. And obviously, he's talking on that TV station, that Jacksonville area, to a good number of Florida fans in that sort of First Coast type area. He's talking to a lot of them. And listen to the honesty with which Carson Beck spoke about the Florida offer and the good that Florida offer did him to get what he really wanted. This is the guy that Tim Brewster is picking a fight with when it comes to recruiting. Let me remind you about Carson Beck from Jacksonville Television.
I had obviously named Florida as my leader, and I kind of just put that out there to say, hey, this is the team that's coming at me the hardest. This is the team where I feel like I could see myself at. But also I had two schools kind of in the back of my head, one of those being Georgia, where if I got that offer, I would pause for a second and say, okay, hold on, I got to kind of take this in. So I visited up there, and it was absolutely awesome and everything that I expected.
So listen, that is the guy that you're talking about here. Kirby Smart, the guy who convinced Carson Beck to use the Florida offer to get the Georgia offer and then go on local TV and dunk on him because of that. That's who you're picking a fight with here, and that's who you have to be very, very careful with. So listen, I'm not mad at Tim Brewster. I think it's kind of fun. I think this is what makes the SEC great, the fact that so many programs fight over so few elite players, and that's always the biggest story behind all of this. There are never going to be enough elite players to go around. When you get them, you don't just help your own program, but you hurt the other program who wasn't able to get those players, especially when you go into that state and do that with a Marcus Roseman, with a Jalen Carter, with a Warren Brinson, with a Carson Beck, and some of those kinds of names. So Florida apparently trying to throw its hat into the ring when it comes to recruiting. I guess good for them. Glad they're trying to do that now. But just be careful what you wish for when it comes to battling Kirby Smart on anyone's turf, including your own. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon as well on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you on the show today. I told you off the top we're going to have Mike Griffith on the show. It sounds like Mike's got a little bit of a scheduling conflict or whatever. It sounds like we're not going to be able to have him on. Let's just make sure we communicate that with him, that he's not going to, have time to be with us today. Michael, are you hearing me right now? Can you let him know that? So it sounds like Michael's got Mike Griffith has got a scheduling conflict. So we'll figure out some other time to have him on the program here today. Of course, good to have all of you with us. We'll have some fun here coming up. And it's all brought to you by our friends at Merriweather & Tharp. They are your source for Georgia divorce. Of course, you can check them out. And listen, I realize that divorce can be not such a fun topic to talk about. I completely understand that. But here's the thing you got to understand, though. If you find yourself going through this, what you're going to want is someone who's been through this before. You're going to want someone who has that institutional knowledge, who's kind of collected, experience gained by going through this thousands of times before, helping people thousands of times before kind of put their life back together, put their finances back together, put their relationship with their family back together. That's what Merriweather & Tharp is famous for, and that's what they want to do for you. I have hung out with my friends at Merriweather & Tharp plenty. I'm always impressed by the generosity which they approach such a tough topic. So let me invite you to check them out online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Merriweather & Tharp. And as I said before, they are your source for Georgia divorce. It's a DawgNation Daily presented by Merriweather & Tharp today, and let's get ready to go around the doghouse right now. And I think one of the most interesting things to come out of the NFL scouting combine this past week in Indianapolis, and it's been ongoing, is something that former Georgia offensive lineman Isaiah Wilson had to say. Wilson is a pretty sharp guy, and he was always a very good player at Georgia. And in talking about his own career, Wilson was always really good at discussing that, always really insightful in terms of what he was trying to do and kind of how he got to the process that he got to as a starter and kind of a bedrock member of that Georgia offensive line. And he's also got great insight into other offensive linemen as well, including the ones that are going to follow him up at the University of Georgia. I want to give you a couple of examples of that as we go around the doghouse here today. Let me start with this. Our buddy Mike Griffith, who was going to join us today, and I guess we'll catch up with him at some other time. Our buddy Mike asked Isaiah if he had a chance to see the Sugar Bowl and what he thought of the offensive line that day that played without him and Andrew Thomas and some of the other guys. What was it like to see that offensive line in place with maybe some backup guys kind of stepping into a starting role? And I thought that Wilson gave a very, very forceful endorsement of kind of the group of linemen following in his footsteps there at UGA. I think you'll like this. Here's Isaiah Wilson.
Those aren't filling guys. They're talented. They're starters everywhere else, I guarantee it. So they're not filling guys in my eyes. Those guys are some ballers. I had fun watching them. They definitely made me proud, for sure.
So I think that's really good stuff from Isaiah Wilson, and I think it's a good reminder for Georgia fans. A couple of things here. First of all, it's obvious that during the Kirby Smart era, even though that Kirby's a defensive guy, he's also kind of ushered in sort of a level of physical toughness, tenacity to the Georgia program, and the brand that Georgia's established has been on defense. It's been running the football. And that brand has been established along the offensive line as well. And when a guy like Sam Pittman makes the decision to leave and go become head coach at Arkansas, and Georgia, maybe a little different than some of the SEC teams, actually celebrate when the guy has a chance to improve his professional standing and get a bigger and better job and make more money. You wish Pittman well on the way out the door, but it does leave some Georgia fans trying to ask the question of, well, what is really going on here with the future of the Georgia offensive line? With no more Pittman, is this bedrock identity that Georgia's been able to establish, is that still going to be the way going forward? Is Georgia still going to have a good offensive line, or not just a good offensive line, what Georgia aspires to is kind of a great offensive line? Is that still going to be the case in the absence of a Wilson, in the absence of an Andrew Thomas? And you hear Isaiah step up this week in Indianapolis and say, yeah, you better believe those aren't backups. Those aren't guys that they may be guys that the average SEC fan has never heard of, but UGA fans have followed these names, the Warren Ericksons, the Xavier Trusses, the others. They followed them on the recruiting trail, and you better believe they are ready for their moment, their opportunity to shine here at UGA. In fact, Wilson went into even more detail to a question from Connor Riley about just how good he thinks the offensive line can be in 2020. Wilson won't be a part of it, but in terms of big-time results, that's still what Isaiah Wilson is expecting. Here's also what he said.
Jamari Sawyer, Trey Hill, Warren Erickson, Xavier Truss, the whole O-line.
So, there was 3 guys in the draft you think are still going to be pretty strong.
Definitely. And if you're sleeping on them, they're going to wake you up. And I can't wait to watch them wake you up.
Yeah, so listen, I think that is just really, really good stuff from Isaiah Wilson. Just that level of confidence of, hey, if you're sleeping on them, they're going to wake you up. And I think for Georgia fans, is also comforting as well. As you look at the Matt Luke era, what's going to go on with the Georgia offensive line there, the thought here is, at least from one of the guys who knows these players really, really well, that all of this is going to fall into place. And Georgia, in terms of a new generation of linemen, led by a new offensive line coach and everything else, it should all be really, really good. It's great to have you here with us today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Make sure you check out the DawgNation YouTube page for a lot more on what happened at Indianapolis this week. Stuff on DeAndre Swift, Jake Fromm, really good long interview with Jake Fromm, and a whole lot more fun stuff. You ought to make sure you check out the DawgNation YouTube page for a whole lot more on that. And for now, we got plenty of DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, coming up. All right, so as I said before, we were going to have Mike Griffith on the show. Come to find out, Mike didn't have as much time as I thought he did. It's always weird to kind of find out about that in the moment, but nonetheless, Mike's not available today. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to take a few of your comments. So instead of me interviewing somebody else, you can take some time to kind of interview me, and we'll have a really good time here on a very different version of our show today. But nonetheless, really, really good stuff. So give me a second to pop up the comments. You can talk about the Florida stuff if you want to. You can talk about whatever else. And for our podcast, radio audience, I realize it's a little bit different, but nonetheless, I think it's going to be really fun. We'll just kind of riff here, and we'll just sort of take the conversation wherever you want to go after what has been kind of a wild week. The addition of Scott Cochran, these guys trying to make a name for themselves in the NFL, the evaluation. I think in Wilson's case, and this is one of the things I think I'm going to try to write about at some point in time this week at DawgNation.com, Wilson's kind of been in the spotlight a bit because he is a guy that, has kind of been told by famous names, Mel Kiper even, hey, maybe you should have stayed in school. Maybe you should have, come back for one more year. But when you hear Wilson, and the full video's up at the DawgNation YouTube page, when you hear that, you still see a real confidence in him, not just a confidence expressed by the next generation of Georgia offensive linemen. That's the audio that you just heard, but a confidence about his own game and what he's ready to do and how he feel like he played against some of the better competition. There's a lot of first-round style pass rushers that you battle against in the SEC or the schedule that Georgia played. It sounds like Wilson feels like he did pretty well against those guys. So Wilson's one of those interesting names of, does his ultimate draft position validate his decision to leave school early? Not just leaving after his junior year or his third year at a high school, but in Wilson's case, it was a redshirt sophomore year that he left after not playing in 2017. All right, Charles Wright makes his feelings on Facebook very clear about the Florida Gators. And yeah, listen, I love the rivalry. I love stoking the flames of all that. I just think that's really fun to be able to do. And as I said before, I'm not really mad that, Florida's brought in some assistant who's like talking about closing the borders and talking about, building the fence, run the best players. That's not the way that I feel about that. I mean, this is what Florida's supposed to be doing. I wouldn't expect a Florida assistant coach to say anything less. However, I think what Georgia fans enjoy right now is the idea of, if you really want to poke at Georgia, if you really want to if you really want to pick on Kirby Smart when it comes to something like this, you just better be ready for what comes next. After the way the Brinson recruitment played out this past year, the way the Beck recruitment played out this past year, the aggressive way that Georgia goes in, makes a huge impression on Marcus Roseme and Jalen Carter. Georgia really a fixture in that Sunshine State. After all of that, just be really careful about telling Kirby Smart what he's not going to do. I think that's probably the fair thing there. Drew Odom asking us a good question. Another big story that's kind of gone on this week, unfortunately, is the Devontae Wyatt arrest and what the punishment will be for Wyatt. Kirby Smart has made it one of the, hallmarks of the Georgia program under his era that all of this gets handled internally. Smart's not particularly forthcoming about player discipline. And in this area, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. We're kind of in a new age where injury information is protected by privacy a lot more. And if that's going to be the case, then I think that discipline stuff like this ought to also have at least some expectation of privacy. And I say that as a curious person, a person who always wants to know as much as I can about a subject that I care about, and Georgia football is certainly one of those. I want to know as much as I possibly can. But in this particular case, I think that Smart's well within his right to handle all this kind of stuff internally, because I think one of the things that player discipline ends up being sometimes, it gets used as a little bit of this is a bigger word than I should be using, or a fancier word than I should be using. It gets used as a cudgel, right? I mean, anytime a player misbehaves, there's a chance for virtue signaling. There's a chance for, the public to say, we demand that you punish this person for the wrongdoing. And in some cases, the coaches, when they're very public with the way in which they're disciplining, I think there can also be a temptation on the part of coaches to do that, to say, hey, I'm going to show the public just how serious I take this kind of stuff and just how law and order I am as a head coach. I think that's the real challenge, or the real temptation anyway, when all of this stuff has kind of becomes public. But in the case of Kirby Smart, he's kind of chosen to keep this stuff more private. He's kind of chosen to keep this more in-house. And I think that's the right way to go. Now, you occasionally see this kind of creep out from time to time. There were some boosters invited to a scrimmage who saw some guys running stadium steps, for instance. And so every now and then this kind of sneaks out, becomes a little bit more public. But in terms of being handled privately, being handled internally for Wyatt and everybody else, I'm actually really okay with that from Kirby. I don't have a problem with that really at all. I've taken a couple of Facebook comments. I'll take a couple more YouTube comments. And if you're just joining us, either on video, catching it a little late here, or on our radio program podcast, what has gone down is we're going to have Mike Griffith on the show. Mike, come to find out, had a scheduling conflict, apparently. So Mike not going to be with us here today. We'll try to catch up with him again soon. So instead of me interviewing somebody else, I'm, I guess, sort of allowing some of you to interview me. Here's part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Let's get a few more here on YouTube. Dapper Dan says, BA, which position group are you looking forward to seeing the most when the season starts, and which could struggle the most coming out of the gates? Dapper, that's a really good question. So let's talk about this. The one I'm the most looking forward to seeing right now, I think, is probably the defensive secondary. Because I think when you look at Richard LeCounte kind of stepping into that more expanded leadership role, and how fit he could be for that after 3 years of playing, after everything that's kind of prepared him for this moment, kind of being in that role that J.R. Reed was in a year ago, I think that LeCounte's going to really shine there. I think that LeCounte's going to really just flourish in that opportunity. And I think the cornerbacks for Georgia are incredibly deep, to say nothing of what I think that Lewis Seen's kind of ready to do, maybe in the role that LeCounte was in last year. If LeCounte's the new J.R. Reed, Lewis Seen's kind of the new Richard LeCounte, and I think that Seen's maybe made for that as well. But it's also the depth at the cornerback position. When Tyson Campbell was healthy last year, and unfortunately he wasn't healthy for much of last season, but when he was healthy, he really played well. And we know that Eric Stokes is a guy that is good at knocking balls out of the air. This is a guy that makes plays on the ball. And Georgia got a lot of experience last year for DJ Daniel. Keely Ringo's hard to keep off the field. Tyreek Stevenson, based on the way that he emerged last season in a number of different roles, including being kind of a corner blitz pass rusher from time to time, he's a guy that's hard to keep off the field. That defensive secondary, I think, is really deep and going to be really fun to watch. In terms of the position group, I'm probably the most, I guess, curious and concerned about. For me, both of those are probably on the offensive side of the ball. And it's not because there's not talent. It's not because there's not a number of potential options and potential names to consider. But I think you have to look at the running back spot here, and I think you have to look at the wide receiver position. At running back, you couldn't ask for more options. Zamir White's a former number one back. Kendall Milton's a huge fan favorite. James Cook's a guy that people have been waiting to kind of emerge. Deshaun Edwards is kind of a late addition into this discussion. And Kenny McIntosh was a guy that, when he was given a chance last year, really showed a spark. So at the running back position, there's no shortage of names worth considering. And the safer bet is between that, 5 names that I just mentioned, 2 or 3 of those guys will really emerge. But this is probably more unanswered questions that Georgia's had at the running back spot since probably prior to the Nick Chubb, Sony Michel era in 2014. You probably have to go back maybe even prior to Todd Gurley joining the program to look at a season at the beginning where we know this little about how the running back position is going to really play out. Is Zamir White going to show the spark that he once had prior to the 2 consecutive ACL injuries? Is Kendall Milton, like so many other Georgia running backs have been, ready to go as a freshman? Is there a role for James Cook in a Todd Monken offense that maybe he was never going to find in a more traditional offense, at least traditional by Georgia standards, the last couple of years? What about McIntosh? What about Edwards? That's a fun position group to watch, but there are admittedly some unanswered questions there. I'll say the same thing with the wide receiver position as well. If all goes well with Dominic Blaylock's recovery from ACL injury, and there's no reason to think it won't, then he ought to be a real answer. George Pickens, y'all know by now how I feel about him. He ought to be a real answer. But what about the rest of that? Whether it be a combination of guys who are on the roster like D-Rob, Karis Jackson, whether it be some group from those guys that Georgia signed, a Roseme, a Burton, a Justin Robinson who's on campus right now, Arian Smith who brings the speed. Can you find 4 or 5 guys to give you better play than a year ago? We've gone around and around about what happened with the offense last year. And I've obviously stated my belief that I thought that the receiver position was scapegoated too much for the problems that Georgia had, and I think that's something I want to stand behind. However, whether we sort of mince words on that or not, semantic differences aside, the receiver position was a problem. The receiver position was a little bit of an issue, more than a little bit of an issue. It was a significant issue. It needs to be better in 2020, and the combination of names that I just mentioned trying to get that way, that's something I'm going to be watching pretty closely. And I would say if you're talking about position groups you have a concern about, I don't think that much has changed with the receiver position to kind of take it off that list. We're having a good time here. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Merriweather and Tharp. I'll have more of your questions for me on both Facebook and YouTube. And, of course, if you're someone that listens later on, whether it be radio show, podcast, and you want to get your thoughts heard on any subject, if you can't comment live as we're doing this, you can always reach out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I'll also tell you this, we're going to be live tomorrow out and about. I'd love to have you come by and see me. If you're anywhere near the downtown Atlanta area, tomorrow we're going to do this show live from the Georgia World Congress Center for the Atlanta International Auto Show. That's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be there right there at Building C. The gates open at noon to get in, so when you get there, we'll already be there. So you can come by and see us for that. That's going to be a ton of fun. And if you can't be there tomorrow, don't forget the auto show is actually already going on today. It started yesterday. It's going on today there as well. At the Georgia World Congress Center, all kinds of trucks, cars, SUVs, like 24 manufacturers are represented, kind of giving you the full array of what's out there in the new automobiles. A really, really fun thing to be able to check out. There's also some special attractions. The RV from Christmas Vacation is going to be on hand. Some exotic cars from Caffeine and Octane. So adult tickets are just $12. Kids tickets, that's kids 6 through 12, are just $6. If you're 5 and under, you're free. Also, discounts available for seniors and heroes. So please make sure you check that out. GoAutoShow.com for tickets and more details. That's GoAutoShow.com. I'll see you tomorrow live there for DawgNation Daily. And, of course, we'll also hang around and we'll do our AJC Falcons News Now, sponsored by Miller Lite at 1 p.m. Chuck Smith going to be a part of that. The former Falcon, the former SEC great, so you can come by and see him, come by and see me. By the way, I'm going to have a little note on the Falcons here later on in the program, something they have done that not exactly pleasing me right now. We'll do that with you coming up here on our program today. Let me do a few more comments when we have some time to do that. Of course, we always appreciate you being with us. I'll do a couple more YouTubes and a couple more Facebooks, and then we'll kind of roll on with the rest of the show. Dwayne Street says, dogs are loaded with uber talent. Haters, keep hating the dogs. Feed on it. Go dogs. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Georgia has been good enough now. And by the way, Christy wants to come by the Congress Center tomorrow and get herself a Corvette. I'm sure there'll be plenty of those there. So, Christy, hope you will come by and see us. But to Dwayne's point about the haters, Georgia's been good enough now for a little while that it has certainly developed some haters. And for a lot of UGA fans, when the dogs finally do get over the hump and win that championship, the opportunity to vanquish those haters is going to end up being one of the fun parts of that. S. Beat says, where can I get that hoodie that I'm wearing? This actually came from our friends over at Tailgate Apparel, so you can check that out from them there in downtown Athens. So this was a gift from them, and I do enjoy wearing this. Chase Spitzer says, what's the story with Richard LeCounte? That's obviously, I think, a reference anyway to some rumors from back this weekend. There's no story with Richard LeCounte. Richard LeCounte's as much a part of this Georgia program as he's ever been. At least that's my understanding on all of this. You got to be careful with off-season rumors. For the most part, they exist to fill an information void that kind of shows up this time of year. Just keep your head on a swivel for anything that feels too unverified, I guess. Yeah, just keep your head on a swivel about that. The Green Soldier checking in on YouTube to say is, when UGA finally breaks through and wins that big game, it's going to be a sweet ride. And obviously, and I think that Green Soldier's right about that, one thing that brings to mind is a lot of what you've heard this week. There's this weird version of naysaying out there of, well, Georgia may have, made a big move in February. They hired Scott Cochran, but they still got to beat Alabama on the field. That's like if you listen to a lot of radio, if you watch a lot of streaming video shows like this, a lot of online content, that's kind of like the big thing that you hear a lot of. Well, Georgia may have, brought in Scott Cochran, but they still got to win. They still got to beat Alabama on the field. They still got to do all of that. That's a straw man argument because you're actually arguing against someone that is not trying to argue back with you. No one's going to deny. No one would ever say that having success in December, January, February, whether it be hiring assistant coaches, bringing in recruits, things of that nature, no one would ever say that is equal to or on par with winning in September, October, November, December, certainly going into the start of January. No one would ever say that. However, what the people who want to kind of naysay when Georgia gets recruiting wins, when Georgia makes bold assistant coaching hires, when they want to kind of downplay that because Georgia hasn't yet won a national championship, here's what my response would be back to the people who would kind of argue that point. Show me someone who's won a national championship that didn't start off by doing things like this, that didn't start off by having a great offseason, because that's what the Georgia hater likes to say. Oh, Georgia, offseason champions once again. Show me a national champion who didn't also have a great offseason, who didn't also have elite recruiting classes year after year leading up to that national championship, who didn't make the boldest, most aggressive assistant coaching hires possible. Show me someone who's won a national championship that didn't lay the foundation for that national championship by doing these kinds of things. So I'm not going to tell you that hiring Scott Cochran or hiring Todd Monken is the same thing as winning a championship, or having a number one recruiting class in 2 of the last 3 years is the same thing as winning a national championship. That's not what I'm going to say. But what I will say is this, is that those are the kinds of things that national champions do. That's the, if that's what you aspire to, this is the way you have to behave. These are the actions you have to take. Georgia has taken those actions now, has put itself in a position, and now it does need to go out and win on the field. But you can't win these big games in the field without laying the groundwork for that. And thankfully, over the course of the last few years, certainly the last couple of months, Georgia's taken some big steps in that direction. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, is rolling on right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So a little fun, a little different, do things a little differently today. You having a chance to interview me, and I really enjoyed that. Of course, if you're live on video, we'll get more of your comments on Facebook and YouTube a bit later on. And, of course, as I said before, you can always reach out on Twitter at DawgNation Daily if you want to keep the conversation going. For now, though, we need to cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. Let me tell you about Oasis of the Seas, one of the most awarded ships at sea. Also, a ship that's recently undergone an incredible amplification, completely reimagining this beautiful ship, making it bigger and better than it's ever been before, adding Ultimate Abyss, the tallest slide at sea, 10 decks down, big-time plunge there, Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade. If you're a sports fan, when you're at sea, you want to be able to settle in and enjoy some good sports. That's what Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade gives you a chance to do. There's also like nightlife venues, music hall, Lime and Coconut, Bionic Bar. You got robotic arms, making your drinks, things like that. It is all one of the things that makes a Royal Caribbean cruise so much fun. I know you need a vacation. It's time now to start thinking about yours here for 2020. So make sure you check that out, whether it be contacting your own travel advisor or let me recommend my friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. That's 800-326-4971. 800-326-4971. Let them know you heard about them right here with us on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, it's always fun to tell you about everything going on with a Royal Caribbean cruise. All right, let me do this. And I realize that this is going to sound dumb, but let me make a case for why I think it's not quite as dumb as it initially sounds. I think the SEC should go after USC. And I think the SEC should add the University of Southern California into its profile of schools. Now, the reason why I say this is because I wrote about this week at DawgNation.com. There is a huge level of financial turmoil facing the Pac-12. And if you're a school that has options, USC does, getting out of the Pac-12 and looking at something different, and the idea has been floated of, well, maybe USC would just become an independent. That's certainly an option, and geographically that probably makes more sense. But we're kind of past the age of geography mattering much when it comes to conferences. The ACC is the Atlantic Coast Conference, and yet you've got, you got Syracuse in the league now. You got Boston College in the league now. The original footprint of the ACC's long since been forgotten. Even the SEC, which is supposed to be the Southeastern Conference, what you have in that school in that conference anymore isn't quite as southeast as it used to be. There's Missouri. I don't think of Missouri as a southeastern team. That's a Midwestern team to me. Texas A&M, I don't think of that as a southeastern team. It is in the South, but I think of it as more the Southwest. Culturally, College Station, Texas, and Athens, Georgia are very different places. So you've kind of given up on the idea of the SEC being the Southeastern Conference anyway. You've sort of stretched beyond that. So why not stretch as far as you can and bring in USC? Now, I realize that travel-wise, this would be a huge, huge problem. I shouldn't say a problem. This would be a huge issue for a lot of programs in the SEC. But take Georgia fans here for a moment. Georgia fans love the travel. Georgia fans get more excited about going a long way away to watch Georgia play sometimes than they do about going a few miles down the road seeing the team play in Athens. I mean, it's easier to get 40,000 Georgia fans to show up in Nashville or show up in South Bend, Indiana, than it is to get 90,000 to show up to watch Austin Peay in Athens. Georgia fans love the trips. They love the destinations. We already know they love going to Southern California because they, to the tunes of tens upon tens of thousands, headed out there for Pasadena in the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago. The occasional trip to L.A. to face USC doesn't seem like that much of a stretch either. Plus, we're probably not that far away from an NFL team being in London, so if you can fly this direction in the Atlantic, why can't you fly the other direction back towards the Pacific and go to California? Ultimately, is something like this going to happen? I wouldn't say never for the SEC, for anybody else. I think just given, and if you'll read the piece that I wrote this week at DawgNation.com, I kind of go into more detail about this. Given the huge imbalance that exists between certain conferences, it's really the SEC and the Big Ten right now, far out in front of the rest. We'll see how the ACC has changed once its network is fully implemented. But with the Big Ten SEC right now, from a financial standpoint, well out in front of the rest of their college sports brethren. Some other big radical realignment, much the same way we kind of experienced about a decade or so ago, some other version of that moving forward, I wouldn't say that's never going to happen. And I wouldn't dare suggest that one day the SEC couldn't look even more different in the future than it does right now. So why not get in on the ground floor of this? If USC is really looking for another place to go, maybe offer them a little bit of a home in the SEC here. I'm sure many of you probably think that's dumb, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds for college sports on that. Let me do a couple other things here as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I also think it's really interesting at the scouting combine this week, that debate that emerges between Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. Now, these two guys aren't debating each other, but quarterbacks being debated about, whether it be the presumed number one pick Joe Burrow, and this always happens. When you get a little closer to the draft process, you stop hearing about how good a player is, and you start hearing about how, what's wrong with him and why maybe he shouldn't be the number one overall pick, hand size or this or that. It certainly seems like there's a lot of talking up of Tua Tagovailoa right now. I like the draft because I'm curious to see who gets picked where and where players end up going. But I don't like the draft process in terms of how it's handled by the media, because there's a lot of smoke screens out there. A lot of people saying, this player's rising up boards, this player's falling down boards. Ultimately, I'm not quite sure any of this really means anything. I mean, the big knock on Tua Tagovailoa is going to be, can he stay healthy? We've seen 2 years in a row where he just hasn't stayed healthy. Is he a special prospect if he's healthy? Maybe he is, but that's a hypothetical situation not worth considering because he hasn't been healthy in each of the last 2 seasons. And the most serious of those injuries is the last one that occurred. And obviously, a lot of people are going to say, but he's got a clean bill of health. I'm not buying that any more than I'm buying any of the other things that have been kind of, put out there as of late. Everyone lies during the draft process. I don't know that Tua Tagovailoa is injured, but I certainly wouldn't be so quick to believe, some dramatic clean bill of health right now. My issue with Burrow is the offense that he played in last year. I think that Joe Brady was such a good offensive coordinator that for a guy like Burrow, who is a good quarterback, and when I saw him live, he may have been the best I've seen live. But I think success in that offense with that talent around him, I just think is easier. Do I think that Burrow is a game-changing NFL quarterback prospect? I guess I probably don't. So as much as I've, watched so many snaps of the Tua Tagovailoa college years and the Joe Burrow college years and been impressed by both, I guess I'm not exactly sure that I think either one of those is a game-changing NFL prospect, but they're going to be at the center of all the discussion and it should be interesting to see where it goes next. We'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me also say one more thing about Burrow and Tagovailoa as we transition into our next topic here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. I thought it was interesting that the Washington Redskins, holders of the number 2 pick, after having drafted a quarterback, Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State last year, have also, according to reports, met with Tagovailoa and Burrow this year, even though it stands to reason that they probably won't be taking a quarterback. It's been largely assumed that Chase Young, the pass rusher from Ohio State, is on his way to Washington, and yet Washington still doing due diligence, meeting with Burrow and meeting with Tagovailoa. An NFL team that has not done that is apparently the Atlanta Falcons. Let me show you a really interesting, a small piece of a really interesting article from the Falcons official website, AtlantaFalcons.com, where the reporters that cover the Falcons for the team site have chronicled, I think it's a total number of 13 different running backs the Falcons met with, but I'm going to read this to you. Georgia running back DeAndre Swift, considered among the very best players at his position in the draft, said he had not met with the Falcons and did not have a meeting planned with them this week. So if DeAndre Swift, and this is from AtlantaFalcons.com, as I said before, so if DeAndre Swift says, I don't have any plans to meet with the Falcons, and if they've met with, in informal capacity anyway, with as many as 13 running backs, we pretty much know on the basis of just where things are going that Atlanta's looking for running backs somewhere near the front end of this draft. They have 3 picks in the top 55. I've written at DawgNation.com before, given what I understand with the Falcons, given what I know about Swift, I think Atlanta ought to draft DeAndre Swift in the first round. But it sounds like, on the basis of this reporting, Atlanta may not be considering him at all. I think that DeAndre Swift will eventually make this look like a mistake, because the players that would be available to Atlanta, and I realize that a lot of you don't live in Atlanta and you don't really care who the Falcons draft, but many Georgia fans also live in the state of Georgia and would be interested to see a Georgia player play for the Falcons. I think Swift is going to be good enough at the NFL level to make Atlanta regret it if they look to a different running back or a different position in that number 16 pick. But for now, that seems to be the direction that the Atlanta Falcons are heading, as according to the reporting there from AtlantaFalcons.com. I'll mention one more thing at the door here. So last night would have been a real opportunity for Georgia basketball. And good game, overtime against South Carolina. Big performance from Ant-Man Edwards once again. Just not quite able to get it done, though, against South Carolina. Gamecock's one of those kind of like bubble teams. I think Joe Lunardi from ESPN, has them not the first 4 out, but the next 4 out. So they're one of the 8 teams kind of outside the bracket picture right now who could fight their way into the tournament. Georgia, if you could win a game on the road against a team playing for its tournament life, that'd be kind of a real statement on the heels of the 2 wins that Georgia's collected in a row recently, including the big one over Auburn at home recently, but just not able to get done. So a real opportunity for Georgia last night, but not one the Dogs were able to capitalize on. So we'll continue to follow them as they head towards the SEC tournament. I mean, I still feel for the most part that this is a Georgia team that's going to be, pretty fun to watch in the SEC tournament. I think Ant-Man makes UGA a little bit of a tough out. But last night was a chance to establish some real momentum, not just beating a bad team on the road the way that Georgia did with Vanderbilt, but actually putting 3 wins in a row together against a team that had to have the game and a coach, Frank Martin, that's been pretty good in spots like that in the past. But Georgia's just not quite ready for that. There was a offensive foul call on Severe Wheeler there late in the game, where maybe he should have pulled up and taken a jump shot. That if he shoots the 3, maybe Georgia wins the game. He tries to drive to the basket. You kind of understand why. Freshman maybe a little bit out of control right there. A pretty good game, but Georgia not able to get it done in Columbia. What has been able to be done is the Gatorhater update, because we're now looking at a nice little number here, 1,216 days. That's how long it's been since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs, and that's good news here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for R.S. Andrews cool down. We did a bunch of comments before, so we probably won't do a ton of those right now. Mike was supposed to join us and was good enough to tell us during the show that he wasn't going to be able to do that. So we will take a few of your comments instead here now and get ready to roll off the air. I will remind you to check out R.S. Andrews for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. If your water heater goes out, you don't want to wake up in the morning and try to take a cold shower. Nobody wants to do that. R.S. Andrews can fix that problem for you. As I said before, you can find them online at rsandrews.com. Wes Cameron says the Falcons never leverage home talent. That's one of the Falcons. Yeah, I just think it's a really weird look for Atlanta not to even meet with DeAndre Swift, at least according to the reports, not to even meet with Swift. You meet with 13 backs, you don't meet with Swift because, as I said before, even if you don't plan on drafting him 16th and you think that he's going to be gone before you pick in the second round, I mean, Washington's talking to quarterbacks that it's not going to draft. Washington's doing some things like that. Just to make sure it does its due diligence and to protect the value of the pick in case somebody wants to slide ahead of a team like, say, Miami at 18 that might want to take DeAndre Swift. Protect maximum value on all of that. But as it stands right now, that is not that's not the way that's going to go. We're getting a little bit of something coming in over the speakers here. Let's be careful with that. All right, John William Adams says, do you see a day where Georgia has a person virtually living in California to recruit? Yeah, listen, I see all of that as a possibility on the horizon because I do agree with what Kirby Smart said, and I'm like the most Georgia-centric guy in the world. I like Georgians playing for Georgia. I've admitted that. I have. Doesn't mean that's all I want Georgia to recruit, but there is a little bit of extra fan favoritism on my part when it's, Richard LeCount from Riceboro, when it's Jake Fromm from Warner Robins, when it's, Dejon Edwards from Moultrie. There's a little bit of extra favoritism there on my part when it comes to those guys. So even as someone who's like, hey, Georgians staying in Georgia as you can get, even something like that, I still believe Kirby Smart when he says the national brand that Georgia has established has made it easier to recruit other places. Kirby said this on the Wednesday, February signing day, that they had interest from players in other states this year that maybe they hadn't gotten in the past. When you're in California playing in a game like the Rose Bowl, when you're doing those kinds of things, when you're in South Bend, Indiana, you're just on a bigger national stage. So I think that Georgia really has a room for both. And, continuing to find a way to leverage that. In the future, all recruiting may be somewhat national just because of the way that TV changes all of this. When you're playing in enough big games, that's where the eyeballs are going to be. And that's really earned media. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, like Mike Bloomberg has to pay $1 billion for all these, commercials all over the place. If you're on CBS at 3:30, that's about to go away. But if you're on ABC at 8 p.m. or whatever else, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's worth millions and millions of dollars to your program. And the TV networks essentially pay you to do it. So not only you get the money for being on the TV game, but you get the earned media that comes from that. Let's see what else. Kenneth Jinks says what was said about Georgia recruiting in Florida. So just to recap the top of the show for you, Kenneth, what I said there was one of the Florida assistants had boasted this week about how they were going to close the borders against Georgia. That doesn't make me mad. I'm not worried about that. But I think if you want to poke at Kirby Smart, you need to be careful. And what I did was I sort of cited some examples where that hasn't worked out too well in the past. The last thing you want to do is challenge Kirby on anyone's turf, including your own. Let me get a couple here. Bob Garrison says, BA, what's your thoughts on the FINIL bill taking place July 2020? I probably should know this. Is this the name and likeness thing? Name, image, and likeness? So, Bob, here's kind of where I come down on that. I'm glad you asked. Here's kind of where I've come down on that. I've almost reversed my position on this completely, and I don't do that a lot. Now, am I always consistent on every single argument? Probably not as much as I probably should be. But when it comes to actually completely 180 degrees changing my mind, I probably have not done that on a ton of subjects since we started DawgNation Daily. But when it comes to my old feelings on, let the players cash in on name, image, likeness. Let the players transfer as much as they want to. Let's treat the players as kindly as we can. I've always kind of been very pro-player and all this kind of stuff. Player versus the institution. I, for the most part, have kind of always sided with the institution. I am less like that than I used to be. In fact, Kirk Herbstreit this week kind of coming out against the transfer rule. I liked hearing that. The argument against the name, image, and likeness stuff, I'm more interested in hearing good arguments against that than I used to be. I've just kind of changed my mind. Here's what I've decided. That a lot of the people that push this kind of stuff are secretly not that, what's the word I'm looking for? they're not necessarily pro college football. I think they're kind of pro chaos. What's the line from the Batman movie? Just want to watch the world burn. I think some of the people that kind of push this of, hey, let's create the chaos brought in by loosening up some of the name, image, and likeness stuff. Let's increase the chaos of massive transfers. I think a lot of the people that push that are actually just trying to troll the sport and just trying to watch the world burn, the institution that's been created. And I think that college football would not have existed for what 150 years. Nothing exists for 150 years that's not doing some good for somebody. Institutions that exist that long would have stopped existing if they weren't good institutions. College football has done a lot of good for the people who are part of it. But a lot of the radical ideas being proposed right now, I think, are actually a potential risk for the sport, something that puts the sport in jeopardy. So I'm not as in favor of that kind of stuff as I used to be. I've really changed my mind on that. Now, when it comes to name, image, and likeness, would I be okay with, and this is what they're not going to do, right? I'd be okay with telling, players, whatever else, you can make as much money as you want away from college football. For instance, the example that always comes up. If Jake Fromm could have gone to blah, blah, blah auto dealership and appeared there for 2 hours and gotten $10,000 for doing that, I'd be in favor of that. But if you read these name, image, and likeness bills, that's not the kind of thing that, for the most part, or I should say, that's not what the NCAA supports. The NCAA supports more of a thing where the NCAA controls the revenue and then distributes to players. They don't give the players the freedom to kind of earn their own revenue. They want to be like the go-between between all of that. And while I'm not in favor of any of this as much as I used to be, that specific model I'm really not in favor of. Kenneth Jinks says, do you think our recruiting is better with the Cochran hire? I think that Scott Fountain may have been a better recruiter than he was given credit for. I think that Fountain, for whatever reason, was just the least known Georgia assistant. Not through any fault of his own. He just wasn't that famous. He just was not known very well. And so therefore, I think people maybe fail to realize, wasn't he a Florida recruiter? He had part of Florida as his area recruitment, I believe. I think that's right. And I think he had great success doing that. So my point in all of this is it's probably not a 2-foot putt just to match what Scott Fountain did. That he was a capable assistant coach, and it's one of the reasons why he's moving up in his career, making more money now in the future. However, do I think that Scott Cochran has a real chance to be a very good recruiter? I think so. I think that's something he really wants. And I think when you see the energy that he brings to the Alabama strength and conditioning program, imagining that energy then transferring to another area, another aspect, like recruiting, something along those lines, seeing that energy transfer from one thing to the other, I think it's easy to imagine that happening. I do. Bob Garrison says if the bill passes, it'll only make it legal in Florida July 1st, 2020. Bob, here's the one thing I'm going to plead some ignorance on. With all of these states kind of approaching different laws, and some of them I think are a little more, I guess, expansive than others. The California law proposed legislation, for instance, I think is pretty wide open. I don't know how that's going to impact with so many sports having such different things. I mean, ultimately, the NCAA, I think, is going to try to use its leverage, whatever it has, to get some sort of blanket national approach to this. And I don't know how these state legislatures and the different legislations they're pushing are going to impact that one way or another. So on that particular aspect of this, Florida's law and how it's different than California's proposed legislation and everything else, I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that part of this for now. Danny Blackman says, do they not have any heat in that studio? So the honest truth is, like a lot of studios, we keep it pretty cool in here. And look, here's the thing. Like, I've lost a decent amount of weight so far this year, or going back a few months ago, a decent amount of weight. But still, when it comes to being on TV, there's a reason why, like, the old school TV people wear sport coats all the time. The more clothes you have on, the better it looks. I mean, if you're just not, like, rocked up, to the nth degree, like being in like a short sleeve shirt or t-shirt is typically not a great look. Now in the summertime, I'll still wear the short sleeves and things like that. But I like to keep it cool here and wear the long sleeves and stuff when I can, because it just sort of looks better. So yeah, that's kind of the thing there. A couple more, I'm going to go. I can't really tell what people on YouTube are talking about right now. Let me see if I can find a couple to get to. Mike R says, how about stipends for all players? So that's the thing that I'm probably the least in favor of. And the only way I can say that is that college football players, just like any other field in life, they aren't all worth equally the same. This is a problem in golf, right? For those of you that care about golf, there is a really interesting financial future coming from golf because there's a belief, and a lot of people who follow the PGA Tour understand this, that the guys who are the best, most marketable, the guys that are winning the most on tour aren't making enough, and the guys down at the bottom of the money list, like 125, there's a belief that those guys are making too much. They're essentially stealing money. Stealing may be too strong a word, but they are siphoning off money that ought to be going to the better players. And at some point in time, it's going to be hard for the PGA Tour to keep everybody happy as long as you've got the best players subsidizing the lesser players. And so a stipend type situation for college football would be very much the same way. You've got certain players in the Georgia roster who, if you really allowed them to make money off their true value, it'd be a pretty substantial total of money. There are other players that, they're just not worth as much in terms of their name, image, likeness. It's just not worth as much. It's just not. It's just how life goes. And so I'd be more in favor of allowing people to cash in on their true worth and value. What does an open market provide for your talent, for your charisma, whatever else? Capitalize off of that. But what I don't want is everybody making $10,000 with one guy being worth $1 million and one guy being worth less than that. That's not what I would want. Dennis Wilson says golf, like chess, is a thinking man's game. Yeah, I'm not very good at chess. Never really have been. I do like chess, but I'm not very good at it. Jeremy Shipe says, I think my credit card is under your foot. I don't know what that means, but that's funny nonetheless. We're going to get ready to go here. Memphis Dog says, nobody's forced to accept a scholarship. NFL needs to start a farm team system and quit messing with college football. And I understand where Memphis is coming from on that. I guess here's my point. At a certain point in time, if you keep calling that bluff, hey, start your own farm team, at a certain point, the NFL may try that. The XFL may try to get on that game too. And I guess what I'm saying is, I'm a traditionalist. You're probably not surprised by that. I like traditions. I like things the way they have always been. And when it comes to college football to the NFL, that tradition really works. If the NFL wanted to create its own minor league, and by the way, the NBA has one now, right? I think it's called the G League now. It used to be called the D League. I don't really know much about it, but I have a hard time believing that guys playing in the G League for basketball are more prepared for the NBA than guys who go through college football. College football is just a really good proving ground. And for some people, it gives them a chance to prove they belong in the NFL. Whereas if they were evaluated as 18-year-old kids, they wouldn't have gotten on that track. But when you go out and perform against the other elite athletes, sometimes the cream rises to the top, and the NFL gets to see, after 3 years or 4 years worth of evaluation, wow, this guy's really, really good. And all of a sudden, college football becomes a springboard for the NFL. I think that the level of scouting you get to do on the basis of what happens on a college football Saturday is better than almost any other league could ever create. So I understand why someone would say, hey, if you want to start your own minor league, go start it, but we're going to treat college football different. I understand that. I guess I'm a little fearful of calling that bluff too much because at a certain point in time, they're probably going to try that. Bob Garrison, thanks for checking in. Appreciate you being here. We're going to get ready to go after this. Robert Barnes says the NCAA needs to keep their hands out of the players' pockets. If you can sell your autograph, your lot of tickets, so be it. See, what Robert said is essentially what I agree with. The idea that you would restrict someone from selling something they're able to sell, I'll never understand that. Nick Duke says, is Cochran bringing the Alabama kicking curse with him? So, which is funny. And we're going to get ready to wrap up after this. Here's one thing I'll totally admit. Hopefully, when I feel like I have some insight into something, I do a good job of conveying that. When I feel like I don't have any insight, I won't pretend to know. Like, I really don't know who makes the kickers better at Georgia. I really don't know. I don't know what that person's name is. I'm assuming it's not Scott Cochran. Maybe it is. I'm assuming it wasn't Scott Fountain for Rodrigo Blankenship. When I've been at Georgia practices, the kickers are kind of just sort of off by themselves doing their thing. And when you got, it used to be Cameron Nizelek, was a graduate transfer. And, Rodrigo Blankenship had been around for a long time. And you've got older guys like that. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're probably capable of being their own coach a little bit. But for a young guy like this year, like who is going to get, if it's Jared Zirkle who ends up being the kicker, who is getting him ready? I really don't know. Maybe it is Cochran. I won't pretend to necessarily know the answer to that question. Graham Nicholson mentions Kevin Butler. Yeah, Butler was that guy in 2017, but that's back when Butler was still an undergraduate. He was coming back to Georgia working on his degree, so he got to be a student assistant. And I use air quotes around that. He was a student, but is obviously, much older than the typical student assistant. That's the same job that Jarvis Jones was in a year ago. But once Butler graduated, he wasn't able to be a student assistant anymore. So they really haven't. At least in terms of a famous name, they haven't replaced that Butler name. Yeah. So and Keith Folds also mentioning Butler as well. Yeah, totally familiar with Butler back in 2017, but don't know how that's been handled since Butler has left. I think we may try to get Cameron Nice back on the show again at some point in time and kind of talk to him about some of that kind of stuff. Wendell Brewer says that Cochran kind of sounds like a drill instructor. Yeah, he does a little bit. He's definitely kind of got that. Again, people mentioning Butler. I should have been clear. I sort of meant post-Butler, who's been doing that. Sorry, I wasn't more clear on that. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Thanks for your patience with the no guest today. You never know what kind of curveball you're going to get thrown once the show comes on the air. John William Adams asked a pretty good question. Any issues with the construction to affect the football team this year? He says, I like the facility being bigger than what Alabama and Clemson have. So it won't be nearly as bad as it was when they were still building the indoor facility. Because when they were still building that, I want to say that Georgia practiced all the time at the stadium, which doesn't seem like the biggest deal in the world, but it's actually a fairly decent trek from Butts-Mehre to the stadium. So I'm guessing that the practice fields won't be impacted by this. I'm guessing anyway, because the way it kind of works is you got track here, indoor facility here, and where my face is essentially where the new building's going to be built. And then above all of that, heading towards the Coliseum is where the practice fields are. So it's a small piece of land, but I'm thinking that you may have to reroute the players walking to practice, but I'm thinking they'll still practice on the fields, the practice fields, and obviously they can practice indoors every day if they had to and not be impacted by construction at all. So one way or another, I think this should be less impactful than the indoor facility was, because the indoor facility just took up so much space, the construction footprint. They probably just end up doing that a lot longer. So if I had to guess, that's probably what I would say. All right, we got to go. Really good stuff. We appreciate you being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. I'll also invite you to make sure you check out make sure you check out AJC for your Atlanta news. Now, of course, we appreciate everything that they do. Always really interesting stuff. Steve Hummer, a great columnist for the AJC Sports, writing about the ongoing proceedings of the NFL Scouting Combine. Also, big preview what's coming up this weekend in Atlanta. You can check out all of that. And, we don't talk about serious topics in the show very much, but a lot going on with the coronavirus. Stay up to date. There's a lot of rumors out there. AJC does a good job of kind of separating fact from fiction and all this kind of stuff. So check out AJC.com and stay up to date on what's happening with the coronavirus and kind of how it's spreading, what's real, what's not. They'll do a good job of kind of keeping you up to date on all of that. Thanks for being here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, make the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Tomorrow from the Auto Show, we'll be there. Show 10 a.m. Of course, you can see us there starting at noon. We're glad to have you with us. And see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.